So I have Asperger's, and as an adult, one of the ways that presents itself is that I have a very kind of rigid understanding of how things should be. And I get a little bit stressed, you could say, when life inevitably doesn't go the way that I imagine it will. But as a kid, I had all of that. But in addition, I was incredibly stressed by food. There was about 10 foods I liked, and everything else, there was like a overwhelming sense that it was stressful to be in close vicinity with it, either because it was too smelly, or there was a strange texture, or I just didn't like the look of it. And of course this affected my life hugely, as well as my family's life, because it meant that almost every meal I was very stressed and I didn't eat as much as I should have. And my parents, who were trying their best to raise me well, to be healthy, but also to be a polite child, were pretty perplexed as to what was going on. So it was very normal at dinner time. I'd be sat in the middle, looking at a plate of food where, I don't know, so let's say I knew that I'd like the carrots, and I liked the way the chicken was cooked. But there was something about the mashed potato, maybe like a spice had been added, or I don't know, maybe it looked a little bit strange. And because that was on the plate, I couldn't just eat around it. Suddenly the whole plate was contaminated in a way that I couldn't articulate. And I just knew I couldn't eat the food. And on one side of me, I'd have my dad saying something about, Kate, you're very lucky. Kids in Africa are starving. On the other side, I'd have my mum saying, Kate, your father worked so hard on this meal, can you show some appreciation? And I'd be sat in the middle as someone who did understand that they were lucky, and that some kids would do anything for a meal like this, and who did want to respect my father, who'd worked very hard on the meal, and who didn't want to disappoint my parents. But I was just sat in the middle, hungry, really hungry, but for some reason not able to eat. And that went on for years. And then by the time my teenage years came, I'd say about half of that just left completely. And by my adulthood, basically it's all gone. And I'm very lucky that it's all gone, but that was a massive part of my childhood, that I just couldn't eat food. It was too stressful. I'm very sympathetic to picky eaters, because I do know the struggle of what it means to feel really, really hungry, but to just not be able to eat, and to experience the judgment that comes with that. Then, in my early 20s, I went through a very anxious period. And this anxious period led me to have to go to psychiatric hospital. In psychiatric hospital, we had this lady come in one day and do a mindfulness test. So what happened was, we were all sat in a circle, and she gave each of us a cupcake. And she said, I want you to take one bite of this cupcake and take 30 seconds to chew it, and then to tell me what it tastes like. And I just thought, what a load of bollocks. Like, people are here for very serious medical issues, and this is one of the solutions. But you join the group largely because you're bored. There's not much to do in hospital. And I was amazed. I was amazed at this cheap cupcake that she'd bought from a supermarket on her way to work, at how much I was actually tasting, and about how genuinely calming the experience of truly having a moment where you're with your food completely, how calming that was to someone who obviously had an extreme amount of restless energy. And I learned a massive lesson from that lesson, because I learned that, first of all, we eat every day, but we experience so little of our foods because we eat in such a rush. You know, we eat on the go. We're eating a lot of processed food that numbs our palate. I learned through that lesson that if you sit down, if you make eating an event, it enhances your life so much. And there are flavors in most of the foods that we eat that we never even experience because we're gulping it down so quick. And I really appreciated then the correlation between tasty food and mindfulness. And then when I left hospital, I had to get a job. And basically, if you're struggling to get a job and nowhere will hire you, what you can always rely on, at least in Britain, is that the hospitality industry will. So I got a job as a waitress. And I had no desire to be a waitress exactly. I had a desire to pay the bills and to get my life back on track. But what I found through being a waitress was that although my job was to serve, that's all I could control, I got so much pleasure from when my customers had a good time. And obviously a big factor of that is when you go out to a meal, is the food. And so that suddenly, in my early 20s, I had all these different angles that I'd never had before for why I had an appreciation for food. You know, I wasn't scared of it anymore. I could appreciate how much it enhanced people's lives, and I was beginning to find it really tasty. And I decided, as someone who couldn't get into the professions that I wanted to do, that instead of torturing myself by constantly applying for graduate jobs and constantly being rejected, I would just do something a bit different for a period of my life. And instead of trying to kind of, jump ladders, I would work my way up the ladder I was on so that hopefully I would then be in a better position to jump ladders. So I used my waitressing experience to get a job in Michelin star restaurants. And I've worked in a 3 Michelin star restaurant and a 2 Michelin star restaurant. And do you know what? You don't need to work in these environments to appreciate food. And there's loads of flaws with the Michelin system in general and just the concept that food should be super fancy. But it does give you a certain way of looking at food. You see how every single detail is crafted so meticulously. You see people saving up for the whole year to come to your restaurant, and this being the event of the year for them. And you see chefs who, left school at 15, worked 80 hours a week, and are now 40 and have now reached the pinnacle of success in their field, and it's their whole life. And you do see food in a different way when you get to experience that atmosphere. Anyway, this is a completely different video from my usual content, and I'm mainly making it because I'm a little bored, but that's my story with how I went from someone who honestly was disgusted by food and would maybe even say I had a phobia of food, to someone who loves it and who feels very privileged to be someone with 30,000 followers on Instagram where I get to review food. And I think, the takeaway more generally might be that if you don't think you like something, or if you don't think you're good at something, it's totally fair enough to say at this time in my life, this is not something I enjoy. But please don't write yourself off forever. Because the idea that as a kid, if you'd said to me, Kate, there's a reasonable chance if you work hard, you can make being a food reviewer, a job for yourself. That would have been so ridiculous to hear. And yet, here I am. So, have patience, with people who don't like things. Have patience with people who are not good at things. Life is long, and they might get there in the end, you never know. And having patience with others includes having patience with yourself. Anyway, my friends, thank you for 30,000 followers. I really appreciate it. All the best.